So now we're going to be looking at how to actually graph the sine and cosine functions. And you will notice I have a set of steps for you. I am going to upload this document to OneNote in case you have a printer at home and want to print it out as your notes, or you can copy these down in your notes as is. I've also put them in OneNote, this little top section. So really, if you want to just take down the examples, that's fine. But it's always good to also rewrite this and have it down in your notebook for reference. So the first step here is determine the amplitude, period, shifts, and reflection. So this is what you just took your last quiz on. I would encourage you to go back to that quiz, see the corrections I made on OneNote. That way you know if you got something wrong. I'm also going to kind of review that step as we go through some examples. Steps 2 and 3 is if we have shifts. So in this video, I am not going to be showing any examples of shifts. That'll be saved for the next video. We're going to start nice and basic. Step number 4 is you want to divide your period by 4. So we're going to get really nice and used to using fractions. So when you divide your period by 4, that's going to give you the first number for your x-axis. So this is going to give you a scale for your x-axis. Instead of being 1, 2, 3, we're going to start with whatever the period divided by 4 is. Count by this number until you have 4 dash marks on your axis. Step 5, you use the amplitude to label your y-axis, and you're going to mark it with an asterisk. So when you don't have a shift up or down, this step isn't as important, but just getting used to that makes it a little bit easier. And then create the pattern of critical points based on the chart below. So I have a nice little chart down here. And then number 7, to create more cycles, repeat the pattern. So I personally, I like looking at charts like this. It's kind of fun. It's like, I don't know if you guys read magazines where they have you pick like this or that. So these, I feel like just kind of make it simpler, in more simple terms. So is it sine or is it cosine? So if it is sine, you need to determine if A is positive or negative. So A is referring to the amplitude. So let's make a note of that. So A is referring to the amplitude. It's in the right amp. And same over here on the blue side, A is referring to amplitude. So A is the amplitude. So whatever you find up here, that is going to go here and here. So if A is positive, then this is your pattern. So x-intercept maximum, x-intercept minimum, x-intercept. So this is not going to make sense until I show you on the graph. If it's negative, it follows this pattern. If it's cosine and then A is positive, it follows that pattern. If it's negative, it follows that pattern. So you notice 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. There are 5 critical points. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So these are giving you those 5 critical points. So you create the pattern of critical points based on the chart below. So it should be 5 critical points that you're plotting. If you want to complete more than one cycle, so one cycle would be 5 critical points. More than one cycle, you could go 10 critical points or 15 critical points, and then just repeat this process. So you would just continue like at this step instead of just putting 4 dash marks, you would put 8 dash marks, or 12, whatever, however many you want to go. So we're going to start with this example. So y equals 3 sine x. Put this by the way. Our first step is to determine amplitude, period, shifts, reflections. So an amplitude, or the amplitude, you will always have an amplitude, and it is not the number in front of sine or cosine. If there is no number there, your amplitude is 1. We do have an amplitude here, so our A is 3. So our amplitude is 3, and it is positive 3. The period So that is going to be 2 pi over b. So period to find period is always 2 pi over b. Write that on the side here. Very important formula. And b is the number in front of x. So a is the number in front of sine, b is the number in front of x. So usually these go in alphabetical order, a, b, c, and d. Sometimes d comes in the front, but we don't have to worry about that for right now. So 2 pi over b, my b is 1 here. So this would be 2 pi over 1 equals 2 pi, and that's my period. So my period is 2 pi. Next, any shifts. Since we're not adding or subtracting anything, we have no shifts. And any reflections. Since A is positive, we do not have a reflection. So since we have no shifts, we can skip 2 because that says vertical shift, and we can skip 3, horizontal shift. So we'll skip those steps. For number 4, divide the period by 4 to get your first number for your x-axis. So 2 pi, I want to divide this by 4. So I'm going to do this in another color. We don't get it mixed up. So to find the period, you do 2 pi over b, and once you have that, then you divide it by 4 and you simplify. So 2 over 4 becomes 1 over 2, so pi over 2 is going to be my first dash here. So pi over 2. We want 4 dashes. 1, 2, 3, 4. And we want them, this is our scale. We want it to be an even amount away. So typically we would do this, right? 1, 2, 3, 4. Because 0 to 1 and the 1 to 2, they're equally spaced. So for our dashes to be equally spaced, for starting at pi over 2, we have to count by pi over 2's. So if this is 1 pi over 2, this would be 2 pi over 2, which equals pi. My next one would be 3 pi over 2. And my next one would be 4 pi over 2, which we can write as 2 pi. Because 4 over 2 is 2. So I counted by pi over 2's. 1 pi over 2, 2 pi over 2, 3 pi over 2, 4 pi over 2. So that's an important step. You want all of your dashes to be the same distance apart. For number 5, use the amplitude to label the y-axis and mark with asterisk max and min. So my amplitude is 3, so that means my maximum is going to be 3 and my minimum is going to be 3. So let's 1, 2, 3, and then down 1, 2, 3. This is my max. This is my min. As you can see, because we don't have a shift, it's just the last number on our list there. All right, what's next? Create the pattern of critical points based on the chart below. So now we're going to go to our chart, this or that. Sine or cosine? Well, it says sine, so we're going to pick this one. Is a positive or negative? It was 3, so that is a positive number. So that means our critical points are going to follow this pattern. So when we start the pattern, we always start along the y-axis. So if we start along the y-axis, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 dashes for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 critical points. So I'm actually going to plot these in blue. Why don't we do it in red since it's fine. So x-intercept is first, so that means along the x-axis. So we always start at the y, There is my first point. My next point, so when I complete one of the points, I move on to the next dash. So this one was here on the y. My next dash is my maximum. So that is going to be up here. Did the maximum, I move on to my next dash. That's another x-intercept. Move on to my next one. That's a minimum now. So every time you complete one of these points, you move on. And then I have an x-intercept. And once I plot the critical points, I draw the line through them. A nice curve. The arrows on the end. And I'm done. So now I can do that same thing for cosine. So I'm going to go through. Determine amplitude, period, shifts, reflections. Here my amplitude is 2. The number in front of cosine, 2. For my period, I have 2 pi over 2 because b is 2. So here's my a, here's my b. So my period is pi. I don't have any shifts because we're not adding or subtracting anything. I don't have any negatives in front, so we don't have a reflection. Next step, no shifts, we can move on. Divide the period by 4 to get the first number of your x-axis. So we are going to take our period, which is pi, and divide that by 4. In blue. There's nothing to simplify. My scale is pi over 4. So if you want to label that as scale, so you know, 1, 2, 3, 4. My first one is pi over 4. So since this is pi over 4, we're going to count by pi over 4s. So this is 1 pi over 4. 2 pi over 4 becomes pi over 2. Our next one is 3 pi over 4. And our next one is 4 pi over 4, which is just pi. So now that I have those labeled, use the amplitude to label the y-axis. My amplitude is 2. So we go up 1, 2, and down, -1, -2, asterisk, asterisk. Next, create the pattern of critical points based on the chart below. So now we are sine or cosine because it says cosine right here. So cosine A is positive again. There's no negative in front there. So we're going to follow this pattern. So now we still start on the y-axis. And first we're going to do the maximum. So we're going to go up to this point. It's in a dark blue so you can see the points. So there's my max. Then we go to an x-intercept on here. And then our next point over is a minimum. And then our next point over is an x-intercept. And then our next point over is back to a maximum. And then you connect the dots, making a nice curve. You don't want it to be a V shape. We want it to be a curve. And there's our curve. So keep in mind, if we were to continue on these patterns, they would create a nice wave. So same thing like here, a nice wave. So that is the gist on how you graph a sine or cosine function in the most simplest form.